In this video, we will try to write another version of bubble sort algorithm. We will improve the process of comparison of the bubble sort. Instead of having two loop statements, we will try to use one loop statement. But in the end, the result of the second version of our bubble sort will still be the same with the result of our previous bubble sort. To start writing the second version, let's reuse the project that we have created on our video lecture about bubble sort. So this is the project from our previous video about bubble sort algorithm. So what we will do now is to compose another version of bubble sort. So just to review what we have written on this project, we have this main method, and on the main method, we use the seed collection class that we have created, and we generated randomized numbers, and those generated numbers are inserted into our seed collection, which in this case the name is mynum, and then we displayed all the elements. Then writing a space just to separate the unsorted elements from the sorted elements, and then we call our bubble sort. We display again all the elements after calling the bubble sort. So to make this clear, let me add here a write line, and then we will write a label here telling our user that this part is unsorted. And on this part, we will write here sorted, so that we'll be able to distinguish which elements are not sorted and which elements are sorted. Okay, now let's start writing the second version of our bubble sort. At the end of our seed collection class, just below our bubble sort, we will write here the second version of our bubble sort. And we will name this bubble sort 2. The next, we will create the temp variable used for swapping, and then a counter variable that we will use for loop statement, and then another integer variable that will hold the value of our upper limit. The next, we will write here a while statement. We will continue on comparing while I is less than or equal to the limbs. And limbs, we know that the value of this is from the upper limit. And then we will write here our comparison. Let's state here that if our my ARR that I is greater than my ARR that I plus 1, because we have to move to the next element, and for us to do that we have to add 1. If that happens, and then we will state here that my ARR contain the value of I will be placed on our temporary variable, and then we'll now overwrite the content of our my ARR with the value of I to have the value of our my ARR I plus 1. And then we will also overwrite our my ARR I plus 1 with the value of our temp. With this, we were able to perform swapping. Okay, so we're not done yet because our I must have a way of incrementing itself That is why at the bottom of our if, we will state here that I must be incremented by 1. So you can write I plus plus, or you can write I plus equals 1, or you can use I is equals to I plus 1. So whichever of these three that you want to use, they are all equal. They perform the same operation. They add 1 to your I variable. But my preference is to use the shortest, which is the I plus plus. Right? So next, there will be a tendency that the value over I will exceed to the number of elements that we have on our myARR. And it will raise an error telling us that the index is out of bounds. So to avoid that to happen, we will state here that if our I when added by 1 becomes greater to the limit, and then what will happen is that we will set our I to 0 so that it will go back to the first index. And then we will set the limit to decrement by 1. Because as we complete the last element, we should avoid comparing the last element because we're through with the last element. So we will move downward. So that is why we have to decrement our limbs. Okay. So next is, let's give this a try. We were able to get it correctly. Now, after defining and creating the second version of our bubble sort, let's call this method inside of our main method. So instead of calling bubble sort, we will call bubble sort 2. Okay, so let's give this a try. Okay, so this is the unsorted. So it gives us the generated random numbers. And then this is now the sorted. So let's see and examine each numbers here if they are really arranged from least to greatest. All right, so I guess we were able to write correctly the second version of our bubble sort algorithm. So there you go. So let's explain what we did for the second version of our bubble sort. So we wrote here a one loop statement in the form of while. And then we used three variables. So we are comparing the elements of our array by using the first element and then adding 1 to that index of the element to get the second element of our array. So we keep on doing that, comparing which is greater, and then we perform swapping. And in order for us to move to the second element, we have to increment our I by 1. So that as it goes back, we'll be able to move to the next element. And every time it moves to the next element, we are examining if our I exceeds to the number of elements that we have for our array. If it does, we will set our I to 0 so that it will go back to the first element. And then decrementing our limit by 1 so that we will not be able to touch the last element because the last element is already in the right order. That's the end of this video, and then see you on the next lectures.